Imagine getting drunk on stolen royal mead and passing out on a jagged chair because your feet hurt, only to wake up with a sword in your face and the terrifying Wolf King purring, "Comfy, my queen?" Yes, one drunken mistake just accidentally married a human brewer to the deadliest warlord in the north. Welcome back to Linas Romantasy collection, and a massive welcome to all the new hearts joining our pack today. If you love possessive alphas and accidental queens, please smash that like button, share this story, and subscribe with the notification bell on so you never miss a heart-pounding update. I want to see how far our pack stretches. Drop a comment below and tell me, where are you listening from right now? Now, let's see if Linnet can survive her hangover and her new husband. Chapter 1. The Throne of Bones. The world was spinning. Or perhaps, Linnet reasoned, the castle was spinning, and she was the only stationary object in the entire kingdom of Valen. "Stupid stone floors," she muttered, her voice echoing too loudly in the cavernous silence of the corridor. She hiccuped, the violent taste of spiced honey mead rising in her throat. "Who builds a hallway this long? It's boastful, that's what it is. A structural brag." Linnet, the 20-year-old daughter of the royal brewer, was not supposed to be in the West Wing. She was supposed to be in the scullery, washing the empty oak kegs her father had delivered for the winter solstice feast. But the head cook had been shouting, the fires had been too hot, and a half-finished flagon of the king's private reserve had been sitting unattended on a sidebar. Curiosity had been the sin, gluttony had been the crime, and now, getting hopelessly lost was the punishment. She stumbled through a set of heavy, iron-bound doors, pushing them open with a grunt of exertion that nearly sent her sprawling onto the rush-covered floor. The room beyond was massive, a cavern of shadows and stone. Shadows clung to the high, vaulted ceiling like cobwebs, swallowing the light of the few dying torches mounted on the pillars. It was cold here, bone-chillingly cold, and smelled of rust, old pine, and something metallic, like a butcher's block left out in the sun. But Linnet didn't care about the cold. She cared about her feet. Her boots were cheap leather, worn thin at the soles, and they were killing her. "A chair," she breathed, spotting a silhouette on the dais at the far end of the room. Thank the gods, a chair. It was a monstrous piece of furniture, looming in the darkness like a sleeping beast. As she wove her way toward it, navigating the vast, empty floor, she squinted. It looked uncomfortable. It was jagged and high-backed, draped in thick, dark furs that looked suspiciously like they had been ripped off a bear 5 minutes ago. She climbed the 3 stone steps to the dais, panting slightly. "Right," she slurred, turning around and flopping backward into the seat. She expected a cushion. Instead, something sharp poked her right in the hip. Linnet yelped, shifting her weight. She ran a hand along the armrest and froze. It wasn't wood. It was smooth, cold, and curved. A rib. She patted the back of the chair. A skull. "Morbid," she critiqued, closing her heavy eyelids and curling her legs up underneath her, heedless of the dirt on her skirts. 0 out of 10 for lumbar support. The king has a bony arse. She giggled at her own joke. The sound bounced off the stone walls, lonely and small. The furs were warm, at least. They smelled wild, like a forest after a storm, a scent that was strangely comforting. Within seconds, the haze of the mead pulled her under. Her head lolled against the jagged backrest, and she let out a soft, unladylike snore. She didn't hear the heavy doors creak open again. She didn't hear the heavy, rhythmic thud of armored boots marching across the stone floor. She didn't hear the sudden, sharp intake of breath from a dozen men, or the sound of swords being half-drawn from their scabbards. What woke her was the silence. It was a heavy, predatory silence, the kind that happens when a rabbit snaps a twig in a den of foxes. Linnet peeled one eye open. The room was no longer empty. A group of men stood at the base of the dais. They were massive, clad in dark chainmail and leather, their faces smeared with war paint and dried grime. They looked like nightmares carved from granite, and they were all staring at her with expressions ranging from horror to disbelief. But the man in the center, he wasn't staring. He was hunting. He was the largest of them all, a mountain of a man with hair as black as pitch and shoulders that blocked out the torchlight. He wore a cloak of wolf pelts, and a crown of iron rested on his brow, crude, jagged, and terrifying. King Emeric, the Wolf King, the Butcher of the North. Linnet blinked, her drunken brain struggling to catch up. Is this a play? Am I dreaming? Emeric took a step forward. The sound of his boot hitting the stone was like a gavel striking a death sentence. His nostrils flared, inhaling deeply. He didn't look angry. He looked intense. His eyes, glowing with a faint amber luminescence in the dark, were locked onto her. The soldiers behind him shifted uneasily. "My liege," one of them whispered, his voice trembling. "Shall I remove the intruder? She defiles the ancestors' bones." Emeric raised a hand, silencing the guard without looking at him. He stalked up the stairs of the dais, moving with a fluid, lethal grace that no human man should possess. He stopped only inches from where Linnet was curled up. Up close, he was daunting. He smelled of rain, iron, and blood. Linnet shrank back against the furs, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The mead evaporated from her system in a heartbeat, replaced by cold, visceral adrenaline. "I'm going to die," she thought. "I sat on his chair and now he's going to eat me." Emeric leaned down. His face was inches from hers. She could feel the heat radiating off him, a furnace in the winter chill. He placed a hand on the armrest, on the skull, boxing her in. He studied her face, his gaze dropping to her pulse jumping in her throat, then back to her wide, panicked eyes. A slow, dark smirk curved his lips, revealing the tips of elongated canines. The silence stretched, agonizing and thick. Then, his voice rumbled through the hall, deep enough to vibrate in her chest. "Comfy, my queen?" Chapter 2. The Law of the Usurper. Linnet's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. She looked like a fish pulled from the river, gasping, wide-eyed, and completely out of her element. "Queen?" she squeaked. The word tasted absurd on her tongue. She cleared her throat, attempting to summon the dignity of a woman who hadn't just been caught drooling on a warlord's furniture. "I think... Surely, your majesty, the mead has gone to your head. I am no queen. I am Linnet. I brew the ale. Or, well, I wash the kegs that hold the ale." She tried to shimmy sideways, intending to slip under his arm and bolt for the door, but King Emeric didn't budge. He was a wall of muscle and fur. He didn't grab her. He simply existed in her space, consuming all the air in the room. "You sit on the throne of bones," Emeric said, his voice dangerously calm. He straightened up, towering over her, and turned to face his court. "Does she not?" The tension in the room snapped. A man stepped forward from the group of soldiers, a scarred, wiry warrior with graying hair and eyes like flint. This was Garrick, the king's beta, and he looked as if he had just swallowed a lemon whole. "Sire," Garrick barked, his hand resting white-knuckled on the hilt of his sword. "This is a jest. A drunken mistake by a peasant chit. She reeks of yeast and fear. Step aside, and I will remove her head. It will take but a moment." Linnet froze. The alcohol buzz vanished completely, leaving behind cold, stark terror. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice rising an octave. "Remove my head? For sitting? There was no sign, no reserved placard. If you didn't want people sitting there, you should have put a rope across it." "Silence, human!" Garrick roared, drawing his blade. The steel sang a lethal song against the scabbard. Linnet scrambled backward, pressing her spine against the uncomfortable ribs of the chair, pulling her knees to her chest. She looked around for a weapon, a goblet, a loose bone, anything, but there was nothing. Emeric moved. It was a blur of motion too fast for Linnet's human eyes to track. One moment he was standing by the armrest, the next he was between her and Garrick. He caught the descending blade with his bare hand. Linnet screamed, but there was no blood. Emeric's gauntlet, crafted from black steel and leather, held the blade firm. He twisted his wrist, and the sword snapped with a sound like a gunshot. He tossed the broken shard onto the stone floor, the metal clattering loudly in the silence. "She touched the bone, Garrick," Emeric growled, his voice dropping into a register that made the hair on Linnet's arms stand up. "The law of sanctuary applies. So long as she remains within the keep, she is under my protection. And if you draw steel on my mate again, I will decorate this hall with your entrails." "Mate?" The word hung in the air, heavier than the stone ceiling. The soldiers gasped. Garrick looked as though he had been slapped. "Mate?" Linnet whispered, staring at the back of the king's head. I think there has been a terrible misunderstanding. I'm not anyone's mate. I'm barely even a girlfriend. I have commitment issues, actually. Ask anyone in the village." Emeric turned slowly to face her. The amber glow in his eyes was brighter now, pulsing with a strange, hypnotic rhythm. He leaned in close again, inhaling that scent of vanilla and yeast that seemed to confuse him. "You sat on the usurper's seat," he explained, as if speaking to a slow child. "To sit is to challenge. If I kill you, I remain king. If I accept you, you become queen. I have accepted." "Unaccept me," Linnet pleaded, waving her hands frantically. "Reject me, please. I'll go back to the kegs. I'll never look at a chair again. I'll stand for the rest of my life." Emeric chuckled. It was a dark, rusty sound, as if he hadn't laughed in years. "It is done, Linnet of the ale kegs. The pack has witnessed it." He reached out and grabbed her hand. His grip was iron-hard, but surprisingly gentle. He pulled her to her feet. She wobbled, the room tilting again, and she fell against his chest. It was like hitting a wall of warm granite. "Walk," he commanded, "before I change my mind and let Garrick have his way." "Where are we going?" she asked, her face pressed against the rough fur of his cloak. "To the royal chambers," Emeric said, sweeping her toward a side door. "It is the wedding night, after all." Linnet's legs gave out. Emeric sighed, scooped her up over his shoulder like a sack of grain, and carried her out of the hall while she beat uselessly against his armored back. Chapter 3. The Cage of Stone. Being carried upside down did wonders for Linnet's nausea, in the sense that it made it significantly worse. "Put me down!" she demanded, hammering her fists against the king's lower back. It was like punching a tree trunk. "This is kidnapping! This is abduction! I have rights! I'm a member of the Brewers Guild, well, an associate member, and we have very strict rules about handling personnel." "You are noisy," Emeric noted, not slowing his pace. He marched up a spiral staircase, his boots thudding rhythmically. "Small creatures are usually quiet so they do not get eaten. You seem to lack this survival instinct." "I am not a small creature. I am a human woman of average height," Linnet snapped, "and I demand you put me down before I throw up on your very expensive-looking boots." Emeric stopped abruptly. He swung her down, setting her on her feet with surprising care. Linnet staggered, grabbing the cold stone wall for support. They were in a corridor she had never seen before, lined with tapestries depicting wolves tearing apart stags, boars, and occasionally men in armor. "Charming decor," she wheezed, wiping her mouth. "Really sets the mood." Emeric ignored her sarcasm. He pushed open a heavy wooden door and gestured for her to enter. Linnet hesitated. "Is there a dungeon in there?" "A bed," Emeric said. "A fire. And water. Go." She didn't move. She looked up at him, tilting her head back to meet his gaze. For the first time, she saw the exhaustion etched into his face. Beneath the war paint and the terrifying aura, he looked tired. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why didn't you let him kill me? I'm just a peasant. I'm nothing to you." Emeric stared at her. His nostrils flared again, searching for something in her scent. He looked confused, frustrated even. "The law is the law, and you do not smell like the others. You do not smell like fear alone. You smell like peace." He looked as surprised by his own words as she was. He shook his head, as if clearing a fog. "Inside. Now." Linnet scurried inside, The door slammed shut behind her, and she heard the heavy slide of a lock. She was alone. The room was magnificent, though austere. A massive four-poster bed dominated the center, draped in crimson velvet. A roaring fire crackled in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows. There was a basin of water on a table, a plate of bread and cheese, and a window that looked out over the jagged peaks of the Iron Mountains. It was a cage, a gilded, velvet-lined cage. Linnet ran to the window and pushed the shutters open. A gust of icy wind hit her face. She looked down. It was a sheer drop of 300 feet to the rocky gorge below. "Okay," she whispered, her hands trembling. "No jumping. Jumping is bad." She paced the room. The alcohol was fading fast, replaced by a throbbing headache and the grim reality of her situation. She was trapped in the Wolf King's bedroom. She had accidentally married a monster. Her father was probably wondering where she was, or worse, he already knew and was mourning her. "Think, Linnet, think," she muttered, pacing a hole in the rug. "You deal with difficult customers all the time. Old Man Miller when he's had too much cider. The chaotic mercenaries during the harvest festival. The king is just a very big, very dangerous customer." She looked at the door. "I just need to explain to him that this is a logistical nightmare. Humans and wolves don't mix. It's biology. It's sociology. It's common sense." She marched to the door and banged on it. "Hey!" she shouted. "Your Majesty! Wolfman! We need to discuss the annulment process. I'm sure there's a form. I love paperwork. Let's do some paperwork." Silence. She slumped against the wood, sliding down until she hit the floor. She pulled her knees up and buried her face in her arms. "I just wanted a chair," she whispered into the dark. "Just one sit." Chapter 4. The Scent of Fear and Hops. Linnet must have dozed off against the door, because the next thing she knew, it was swinging open, and she was falling backward. She scrambled to her elbows, blinking in the harsh light of morning. A servant girl stood there, a mouse of a woman with trembling hands, holding a tray of food. My lady," the girl squeaked, keeping her eyes glued to the floor. "The king commands you to eat and bathe. He says you smell like a tavern floor." Linnet bristled, scrambling to her feet and dusting off her skirt. "Well, that's rude. Accurate, but rude." She looked past the servant. The hallway was guarded by two hulking wolves in human form. They weren't wearing armor now, just leather tunics, but their eyes followed her every movement. "Where is he?" Linnet asked. "The king." "He is in the war room, my lady," the girl whispered, setting the tray on the table. "Please, eat. If you starve, he will blame us." The girl fled before Linnet could ask anything else. Linnet ate. Not because she wanted to obey the king, but because she was furious, and being furious required energy. She devoured the bread, the cold roasted venison, and the sharp cheese. Then she washed her face in the basin, scrubbing away the grime of the previous night. As the scent of the stale mead washed away, something shifted in the air. The door opened again, but this time it wasn't a servant. Emeric stood in the threshold. He had washed the war paint from his face. Without the blood and grime, he was striking. His features were sharp, aristocratic, but brutal. A scar ran through his left eyebrow, giving him a permanent, inquisitive look. He stepped into the room, and then he froze. He inhaled sharply. His eyes widened, shifting from human brown to that glowing, predatory amber. "The mead," he murmured. "It is gone." Linnet backed up until her hips hit the heavy table. "Yes, I washed, as requested. Are we going to talk about the annulment now?" Emeric ignored her. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't touch her, but he leaned in, burying his face in the crook of her neck. Linnet squeaked, freezing in terror. "What are you doing?" "Smelling you," he growled against her skin. He inhaled deeply, a long, shuddering breath. Then he pulled back, looking at her with an expression of absolute bewilderment. "Human," he said, as if it were an accusation. "Yes, I've been telling you that," Linnet cried. "I am human, 100% mortal. I bleed, I bruise, and I have no desire to run around in the woods biting things." Emeric paced away from her, running a hand through his dark hair. He looked agitated. "The alcohol, it masked it. The law of the scent mask. I thought you were a wolf from a distant pack. A runt, perhaps, but a wolf." "A runt?" Linnet threw a piece of bread at him. It bounced harmlessly off his chest. "I am of average height." Emeric stopped pacing and looked at the bread on the floor, then at her. "You are human, weak, fragile." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And yet, my wolf sings for you. It wants to tear the world apart to keep you safe." He looked horrified by this revelation. "This is inconvenient." "Inconvenient?" Linnet laughed, a hysterical, high-pitched sound. "Inconvenient is a rainstorm on laundry day. This is a catastrophe. You can't be mated to a human. Your court hates me. That guy Garrick wants to use my head as a bowling ball." "Garrick will do as he is told," Emeric snapped. "But you are right. You cannot survive here. You are soft." "I am not soft." Linnet grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the table and brandished it like a club. "I carry 50-pound kegs of ale up cellar stairs every day. I deal with drunk mercenaries. I am very sturdy." Emeric looked at the candlestick, then at her fierce, terrified face. A corner of his mouth twitched. "Put the stick down, little bird," he said softly, "before you hurt yourself." "No," Linnet said, her hand trembling. "Open the door. Let me go home, please." Emeric stared at her for a long moment. The conflict in his eyes was visible, the man warring with the beast. The man knew she should leave. The beast wanted to lock the door and throw away the key. "I cannot let you go," he said finally. "The bond is formed. If you leave now, the separation sickness will drive me mad, and a mad alpha destroys his own pack." He stepped closer, ignoring the candlestick. "You must stay, until I can find a way to break the bond without killing us both." "And how long will that take?" Linnet asked, lowering the weapon slightly. Emeric's eyes darkened. "I do not know. But until then, you are mine to protect." Chapter 5. The First Gift. By midday, the news had spread through Ironrath Hall like a plague. The king had taken a human mate. Linnet sat on the window seat, watching the courtyard below. She could see wolves, huge gray and black beasts, sparring in the snow. They moved with a speed that made her stomach turn. "I am in a castle of monsters," she thought, "and I am the pet." The door creaked open. Linnet spun around, brandishing her candlestick again. She had decided to keep it on her person at all times. It was Emeric, but he looked different. He was holding something behind his back, and he looked strangely awkward. Like a schoolboy trying to ask a girl to dance, if the schoolboy was a 6'5" warlord capable of ripping throats out. "I have brought you sustenance," he announced stiffly. "I already ate the cheese," Linnet said suspiciously. "What is it?" Emeric revealed his hand. He was holding a dead pheasant. It was very fresh. In fact, it was still warm, and it was definitely not cooked. He held it out to her by the neck, the colorful feathers drooping sadly. Linnet stared at the bird. Then she stared at the king. "It is a bird," she said. "It is fat," Emeric noted, looking proud. "I caught it myself. In the lower gardens. It was slow." He thrusted it toward her. "For you." Linnet pressed her back against the wall. "Your Majesty, Emeric, it has a head. It still has its head." Emeric frowned, inspecting the bird. "Yes, the head is where the brain is. It is a delicacy." "I'm not eating a raw brain!" Linnet shouted, forgetting her fear in the face of culinary horror. "I am a civilized person. We cook things. We pluck feathers. We do not just bite into the wildlife." Emeric looked genuinely crestfallen. He lowered the bird. You do not like it? It is a high honor. The alpha shares his kill only with his mate. Linnet looked at his confused face, and for a second her anger deflated. He really didn't know. He was trying, in his own gruesome, terrifying way, to be nice. Look, she said, her voice softer. Thank you. For the thought. But humans need fire. We need spices. If you want to impress me, bring me a cooked chicken. Or chocolate. Do you have chocolate in this frozen wasteland? Chocolate, Emeric repeated, testing the word. I will inquire. He tossed the dead pheasant onto the table with a wet thud that made Linnet wince. There is a feast tonight. To celebrate the solstice, you will attend. I really don't think that's a good idea, Linnet said. Garrick looked like he wanted to put me in a pie. You will attend, Emeric said, his voice leaving no room for argument. You will sit by my side, and you will show them that you are not afraid. But I am afraid, Linnet pointed out. Emeric stepped close, looming over her. He reached out, and with one finger, tilted her chin up, his eyes bored into hers. Then pretend, he whispered. Act the part, Linnet. Be the queen they fear, or they will eat you alive. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. And dress well. The Lady Sorcha will be there. Who is Lady Sorcha? Linnet asked, a pit forming in her stomach. Emeric didn't look back. The woman who expected to be sitting in your chair. The door clicked shut. Linnet looked at the dead pheasant on the table. She looked at her candlestick. Right, she exhaled. Lady Sorcha. Great. Just what I needed. A rival with fangs. She picked up the pheasant by a wing, grimacing. Well, if I'm going to a feast, she muttered to the bird, I suppose I should try not to look like a snack. Chapter 6. The Skin of the Beast. Linnet stood in the center of the royal bedchamber, staring at the large wooden chest the servant girl had scurried in to unlock before fleeing like a startled rabbit. Dress well, she mocked, mimicking Emeric's deep, gravelly voice. Easy for him to say. He wears dead animals and looks majestic. If I wear dead animals, I'll look like a violent rug. She threw open the heavy lid of the chest. A scent of cedar and dried lavender wafted up, masking the underlying smell of old stone. Inside lay the wardrobe of, well, someone. Whoever had been queen before, or perhaps the clothes kept for the queen who never was. Linnet pulled out a gown of heavy, midnight blue velvet. It was beautiful, but it was heavy enough to smother a donkey. The sleeves were long and lined with silver fur, and the bodice was stiff with intricate beadwork that looked like tiny teeth. It's armor, she whispered, holding it up against her coarse woolen peasant dress. It's a dress disguised as a fortress. She stripped off her comfortable, ale-stained clothes. The room was freezing, the fire doing little to combat the draft from the high windows. Shivering, she stepped into the velvet gown. It swallowed her. The hem pooled on the floor, and the bodice was loose around her ribs. Perfect, she muttered. I look like a child playing dress-up in a mausoleum. She looked around for something to cinch it. There was no ribbon, no belt. Her eyes landed on the heavy curtain tie-back, a braided cord of gold silk. She yanked it off the wall, wrapped it around her waist 3 times, and tied it tight. It wasn't fashion. It was structural engineering. She moved to the polished silver mirror on the wall. The woman staring back was pale, wide-eyed, and drowning in blue velvet. But there was something else, too. The fear was there, yes, but her chin was up. You are Linnet, she told her reflection. You handle the harvest rush. You stopped old Miller from fighting the blacksmith with a spoon. You can handle a dinner party with wolves. She glanced at the table. The dead pheasant was still there, its glassy eye judging her. Don't look at me like that, she told the bird. I'm having a worse day than you. The heavy lock on the door clicked. Linnet spun around, grabbing her trusty brass candlestick. The door opened, and King Emeric stepped in. He had changed. Gone were the travel-stained leathers. He now wore a tunic of charcoal silk beneath a vest of black wolf hide, clasped with silver. He looked less like a wild animal and more like a king of shadows. He stopped, his amber eyes raking over her. He paused at the hem of the dress, then moved up to the golden curtain cord around her waist, and finally to her face. He didn't speak. He just stared. "Well?" Linnet challenged, lifting the candlestick slightly. "Is it terrible? Do I look like a sack of potatoes wrapped in expensive fabric?" Emeric took a step closer, the air in the room growing heavy. "You look—" He seemed to struggle with the word, his brow furrowing. "You look like the night sky. Small, but vast." Linnet blinked. That was almost poetic. Don't ruin it by growling. Emeric offered his arm. It was thick, muscular, and terrifying. "The court awaits. Do not trip. If you fall, they will see it as weakness." "If I fall," Linnet muttered, taking his arm and feeling the heat of him through the silk. "It's because this dress weighs more than I do." Chapter 7. The Lion's Den. The great hall had transformed. When Linnet had first stumbled into it, it had been a tomb. Now it was a furnace. Hundreds of torches blazed in iron sconces, casting flickering light over long tables crowded with bodies. The noise was a physical wall, a roar of laughter, shouting, and the clattering of pewter mugs. But the moment the herald announced, "King Emeric of the Iron Blood and his mate," the noise died. It didn't taper off, it was severed. Hundreds of heads turned. Linnet felt the weight of 1,000 eyes. These weren't the polite glances of villagers. These were predatory stares. She saw men and women with scars, with teeth filed to points, with eyes that reflected the torchlight like cats. "Breathe," Emeric murmured, his voice a low rumble that only she could hear. His arm tightened around hers, clamping her to his side. "Smell the air. Do not let them smell your fear." "I think they can smell my sweat," she whispered back through a frozen smile. "Is that close enough?" They descended the dais stairs. Every step felt like walking a tightrope. Linnet noticed that the people didn't bow. They lowered their heads, exposing their necks, a gesture of submission that felt far more primal and dangerous than a curtsy. As they walked past the tables, Linnet caught snippets of the whispers. "A human? Look at her. She would snap like a dry twig. Why does he not eat her? Perhaps he is saving her for dessert." Linnet tightened her grip on Emeric's arm until her knuckles turned white. He didn't flinch. If anything, he seemed to grow larger, his chest expanding, his head high. He was projecting enough dominance for both of them. They reached the high table. It was set on a raised platform, overlooking the chaos. 3 chairs sat there, the central throne of bones, and 2 smaller, but still massive, wooden chairs. Emeric led her to the chair on the right of the throne. He pulled it out for her. "Sit," he commanded. Linnet sat. The chair was enormous. Her feet dangled inches off the floor. She felt ridiculous. Emeric sat on the throne of bones. He looked comfortable now, sprawling slightly, one hand resting on the skull armrest that Linnet had drooled on earlier. "My pack!" Emeric's voice boomed, reaching every corner of the hall without effort. "Tonight is the solstice. We celebrate the long night. We celebrate the hunt." He paused, and his hand moved, covering Linnet's small hand on the table. His skin was rough, calloused, and hot. "And tonight," he continued, his eyes daring anyone to challenge him, "we welcome a new scent to the high table, my mate." Silence. Thick, heavy, and suffocating. Then, from the other end of the high table, a woman stood up. She was tall, statuesque, with hair like spun silver and eyes of piercing ice blue. She wore a gown of pale gray furs that looked like they had been skinned from wolves, or perhaps she was the wolf. She was beautiful, sharp, and terrifying. "A mate," the woman said. Her voice was like a violin bow drawn across a raw nerve, smooth but with a screech hiding underneath. "How novel, my king." Emeric stiffened beside Linnet. "Lady Sorcha," Emeric greeted, his tone flat. Sorcha smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. She picked up her goblet and walked around the table toward Linnet. She moved like liquid smoke. "Let us see," Sorcha purred, stopping directly behind Linnet's chair. "What the king has dragged in from the gutter." Chapter 8. The She-Wolf's Test. Linnet felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Sorcha smelled of winter frost and something metallic, like blood on snow. "She is small," Sorcha critiqued, leaning down so her face was level with Linnet's ear. "And she smells of grain and yeast. Tell me, little thing, are you food or are you furniture?" The court held its breath. This was the test. If Linnet cowered, she was dead. If she cried, she was dead. Linnet gripped the edge of the table. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but something else was rising in her throat. Annoyance. She had been kidnapped, threatened, carried like luggage, and dressed in heavy curtains. She was tired of being the punchline. She turned her head slowly to face Sorcha. "I am neither," Linnet said, her voice shaking slightly but gaining strength. "I am a brewer, and judging by the smell of your breath, my lady, you've been sampling the bad batch from last year. It's turned to vinegar. You might want to see a physician about that." A gasp rippled through the hall. Someone at a lower table choked on their ale. Sorcha recoiled, her eyes narrowing into slits. Her upper lip curled back, revealing teeth that were definitely too sharp for a human. A low growl vibrated in her throat. "You possess a sharp tongue for something so easily broken," Sorcha hissed. "And you possess very poor manners for someone wearing such expensive fur," Linnet retorted, grabbing a piece of bread from the table to stop her hands from shaking. "In my village, we don't sniff guests before the soup course. It's considered rude." Emeric let out a sound. It was a short, sharp bark of laughter. Sorcha's eyes snapped to the king. Emeric was grinning. It was a terrifying, wolfish grin, but it was directed at Sorcha. "She has you there, Sorcha," Emeric rumbled. "Sit down, unless you wish to challenge her for the right to brew the ale. I warn you, her stout is formidable." Sorcha's face turned a shade of violet. She glared at Linnet with pure, unadulterated hatred. "Enjoy your meal, human," Sorcha whispered, the word dripping with venom. "The winter is long, and accidents happen in the dark." "I'll keep a candle lit," Linnet said sweetly, biting into her bread. Sorcha stalked back to her seat. Linnet realized she had stopped breathing. She exhaled slowly, her knees trembling under the heavy table. Under the table, a large, warm hand squeezed her knee. "Good," Emeric whispered, not looking at her. "Very good." Chapter 9. The Feast of Flesh. The servants brought the food. It was a parade of carnage. Huge platters were slammed onto the tables, whole roasted boars with apples in their mouths, venison haunches dripping with juices, and bowls of stew that smelled rich and iron-heavy. Linnet watched as the court tore into the food. They didn't use forks. Knives were used to hack, but hands were used to eat. It was visceral. It was messy. It was efficient. A servant placed a plate in front of Linnet. On it sat a slab of meat. It was seared on the outside, but as she watched, a pool of red liquid spread slowly across the pewter. "It's bleeding," Linnet whispered. "It is rare," Emeric corrected, slicing a chunk off his own steak and tossing it into his mouth. "Cooking burns away the strength." Linnet picked up her knife. It was heavy and sharp enough to shave with. She poked the meat. It wobbled. "I can't eat this," she murmured. "It's going to moo at me." "You must eat," Emeric said, pausing mid-chew. "You are too thin. You would not survive a frost." "I won't survive the dysentery from raw beef either," Linnet whispered furiously. "Do you have any vegetables? A potato? A carrot? Anything that didn't have a mother?" Emeric looked baffled. He scanned the table. He grabbed a bowl of garnish, parsley and raw onions, and slid it toward her. "Greens," he offered. Linnet stared at the bowl of onions. "Thank you. A feast fit for a rabbit." She ate the bread and the onions, washing it down with a goblet of wine that was surprisingly excellent. As the meal progressed, she felt the gaze of the court soften, not to kindness, but to a sort of baffled curiosity. She wasn't cowering. She was eating onions and arguing with their king about the nutritional value of potatoes. Suddenly, a hand reached for her goblet. It wasn't hers. It was a massive, scarred hand from the warrior sitting on her other side, a brute named Kale. "Pass the wine, little meat," Kale grunted, his eyes glazed with drink. Before Linnet could react, a low, thunderous growl erupted from beside her. The sound vibrated through the wood of the table, rattling the plates. Emeric hadn't moved, but his hand was clamped around Kale's wrist. His claws were out, digging into the warrior's leather bracer. "Touch her cup," Emeric said, his voice a soft, deadly purr, "and you lose the hand." Kale paled instantly. The drunkenness vanished from his eyes. "My king, I meant no disrespect, I only—" "She is not little meat," Emeric snarled, his amber eyes glowing bright. "She is the queen. If she wants wine, you pour it. If she wants the moon, you find a ladder. Do you understand?" "Yes, sire," Kale squeaked. Emeric released him. Kale scrambled back, nearly tipping his chair over. Emeric turned to Linnet. He picked up the wine jug and refilled her goblet himself. "Drink," he said gently, "and eat your onions." Linnet took a sip, hiding her flushed face behind the cup. Her heart was doing that strange flip-flop thing again. He was a monster, a killer. But he was her monster. Chapter 10. The Law of the Bed. The feast ended not with a speech, but with a collective howl that nearly shattered Linnet's eardrums. She was exhausted, her adrenaline crashing hard. Emeric escorted her back to the royal chambers in silence. The castle was dark now, the torches burning low. When they reached the door, the guards bowed low, lower than before. Emeric unlocked the door and ushered her in. The fire had been stoked, and the room was warm. Linnet walked to the center of the room and turned around. Emeric was locking the door from the inside. Click! The sound was final. "So," Linnet said, her voice high, Where do you sleep? Is there a kennel? A den? A separate wing?" Emeric turned, unbuckling his heavy wolf-hide vest. "I sleep here. It is my room." Linnet pointed at the bed, the one bed. "There is only one bed, Emeric." "The size is sufficient for two," Emeric noted, tossing the vest onto a chair before starting to unlace his tunic. "Whoa! Halt! Cease!" Linnet covered her eyes. "What are you doing?" "Undressing. Night has fallen." "You can't sleep with me!" Linnet cried, peeking through her fingers. "We barely know each other. I don't even know your favorite color. You tried to feed me a raw bird. This relationship is moving too fast." Emeric paused, his tunic half off, revealing a chest that was scarred and sculpted like marble. He sighed, a long, weary sound. "Linnet," he said, sounding incredibly tired. "I am not going to touch you, not in the way you fear. The bond, it demands I be near you. If I am too far, the wolf paces. It howls. I need sleep. You need sleep." He pulled the tunic off and tossed it aside. He was wearing loose breeches and nothing else. He walked to the bed. Linnet grabbed her candlestick. "I have a weapon." "I know," Emeric said dryly. "You have threatened me with the decor all day." He climbed into the bed, on the far left side. He lay down on top of the covers, turning his back to her. He curled up slightly, like a dog settling in for a nap. "Take the other side," he mumbled into the pillow. "I will not bite, unless you steal the blanket. Then we negotiate." Linnet stood there for a full minute. He wasn't moving. His breathing was already slowing down. Slowly, carefully, she approached the bed. She kept her velvet fortress on. She crawled onto the mattress on the far right side, leaving a vast expanse of crimson duvet between them. She lay down, clutching the candlestick to her chest like a teddy bear. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind howled around the tower. "Emeric?" she whispered into the dark. "Hmm? My favorite color is green, like hops on the vine." There was a long pause. "Red," Emeric murmured, his voice heavy with sleep. "Like fresh blood on snow." "Gross," Linnet whispered. "Good night, little bird." Chapter 11. The Morning Treason. The first thing Linnet noticed was the heat. Her room in the tower was usually drafty, a sieve for the mountain winds, but this morning she was enveloped in a warmth so profound it felt like baking bread. The second thing she noticed was the texture. Her pillow, usually soft and filled with goose down, was hard, and it was breathing. Linnet cracked one eye open. She was not on the far right side of the bed. She was not even in the middle. She was completely, traitorously, sprawled on top of King Emeric. Her left leg was thrown over his hips, her cheek was pressed against his bare chest, right over his heart, which was beating with a slow, rhythmic thud, thud. And her hand, her traitorous, mutinous hand, was tangled in the dark hair on his chest. She froze. The brass candlestick, her designated protector, was lying uselessly on the floor, having been discarded sometime in the night during her subconscious migration toward the heat source. "If you are checking for a heartbeat," a deep, gravelly voice rumbled through the chest wall and into her ear, "I assure you it is there, though it beats faster when you dig your nails in." Linnet scrambled backwards so fast she nearly fell off the bed. She caught herself on the edge of the mattress, tangling in the velvet gown she had slept in. "I wasn't!" she squeaked, clutching the duvet to her chin. It was the cold. Thermodynamics, heat transfer. It was purely a survival instinct." Emeric lay there, hands behind his head, staring up at the stone ceiling. He looked infuriatingly well-rested. The morning light caught the scars on his torso, turning them silver against his tan skin. He turned his head slowly to look at her, a lazy smirk playing on his lips. "You drool, Linnet," he noted. "I do not," she lied, frantically wiping her cheek. "You do," he confirmed, sitting up. The duvet fell to his waist. "And you kick. You have the sleep habits of a restless badger." He swung his legs out of bed and stood up. Linnet squeezed her eyes shut, turning her head toward the wall. "Modesty. Have you heard of it? It's a very popular concept in the human realms." "I am a wolf," Emeric said, the sound of water splashing in the basin reaching her ears. "We do not have shame about the body. Besides, you are my wife, technically." "Accidentally," Linnet corrected, risking a peek now that he was pulling on his breeches. "And temporarily, until we file the paperwork." Emeric paused, a wet cloth in his hand. The amusement vanished from his face, replaced by that dark, brooding look that reminded her he was a warlord. "There is no paperwork for the soul, little bird," he muttered. He walked to the door and rattled the handle. He paused, his hand hovering over the lock. His shoulders tensed. He took a step back, then another, as if pulled by an invisible rope. He growled low in his throat, a sound of pure frustration. "What is it?" Linnet asked, sensing the shift in the air. "Is there an assassin?" "No," Emeric snarled, gripping the doorframe until the wood splintered. "It is the bond. I have to go to the war council, but the wolf, it does not want to leave you." He turned to look at her, his eyes glowing that eerie amber. "If I walk out that door without you, I will likely tear the door off its hinges before I reach the stairs. The separation, it is too soon." Linnet stared at him. "So, what? I'm stuck to you? Like a burr?" "Like a limb," Emeric corrected. He grabbed her cloak from the chest, a heavy thing lined with gray fur, and threw it at her. "Put it on," he commanded. "You are coming to the war council." Chapter 12. The War Room. The war room was exactly as inviting as it sounded. It was a circular chamber dominated by a massive table made of black iron, with maps of the kingdom spread across it like a flayed skin. Around the table sat the 12 lords of the pack. They were big, scarred, and loud. When Emeric kicked the doors open and marched in, silence fell. When Linnet shuffled in behind him, Looking like a drowning victim in her oversized velvet dress and gray cloak, the silence became heavy. Emeric pulled a chair, a normal wooden one, right next to his iron seat at the head of the table. "Sit," he told her. "Do not speak. Do not look Garrick in the eye. And do not eat the map markers." "Why would I eat the markers?" Linnet whispered, offended. "They look like candy," Emeric said seriously. "They are actually painted lead. Kale ate 3 last winter." Linnet sat, folding her hands in her lap. Emeric took a seat, and the meeting began. For the first hour, Linnet was terrified. The men spoke of border skirmishes, of grain tithes, of culling the weak herds in the south. Garrick, the beta, kept shooting her glances that suggested he was mentally measuring her for a coffin. By the second hour, the terror had faded. By the third hour, it was replaced by a familiar, gnawing sensation: boredom. They were arguing about supply lines, specifically the transport of dried meat to the northern outposts. "We must send the wagons through the Whispering Pass." Garrick slammed his fist on the table. "It is the fastest route." "It is an avalanche waiting to happen," argued another lord, a one-eyed man named Vorn. "We will lose half the shipment." "But the low road adds 4 days," Garrick roared. "The troops will starve." They went back and forth, growling and baring teeth. Emeric rubbed his temples, looking ready to murder everyone in the room. Linnet raised her hand. Emeric froze. Garrick stopped mid-shout. Every eye turned to her. "Put your hand down," Emeric whispered, without moving his lips. I have a question," Linnet said, her voice small but clear. "You are a human," Garrick sneered. "What could you possibly know of logistics?" "I know beer," Linnet said, sitting up straighter. "My father supplies ale to every tavern from here to the coast. We don't use the Whispering Pass in winter because the vibration of the wagon wheels triggers the snowslides. We don't use the low road because the mud sucks the axles dry." The room was silent. Emeric looked at her, his eyebrow raised. "Go on." "We use the river barges," Linnet said, pointing to the blue line on the map. "The river freezes solid by midwinter. It becomes an ice road. It's flat, it's fast, and you can slide the crates. You don't even need wagons, just sleds. You could get the meat there in 2 days." Garrick opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He looked at the map. He looked at Vorn. "The river," Vorn muttered. "The ice is thick this year. It would hold." Emeric stared at the map, then at Linnet. A slow, terrifying grin spread across his face. "Sleds," he mused. "Why did we not think of sleds?" "Because you're all too busy growling at each other to look at the water," Linnet said before she could stop herself. Garrick turned a shade of purple. Emeric threw his head back and laughed, a genuine loud sound that startled the entire room. "She is right!" Emeric roared, slapping the table. "My queen is right! Garrick, prepare the sleds!" Linnet sank back into her chair, her heart racing. She saw Garrick looking at her. The hatred was still there, but now there was something else. Calculation. She wasn't just a pet anymore, she was a player. Chapter 13. The Shadow in the Corridor. The meeting ended at midday. Emeric was pulled aside by a messenger from the eastern borders. He hovered at the doorway, the golden glint in his eyes flickering with the strain of being more than a few paces from her. "Stay within my sight," he commanded. "Do not wander. So long as I can scent you in this hall, the wolf remains calm. But do not test the distance." Linnet leaned against the cold stone wall, feeling a strange sense of pride. "I helped," she thought. "I actually helped." "Do not let it go to your head, little brewer." Linnet jumped. Standing in the shadows of a tapestry was Lady Sorcha. She wasn't wearing furs today. She wore a dress of dark green silk that clung to her like a second skin. She looked beautiful, lethal, and very unhappy. "Lady Sorcha," Linnet said, clutching her hands together. "I see you're still creeping around in the dark. It's very atmospheric." Sorcha stepped out of the shadows. She moved silently, her steps making no sound on the stone. "You think you are clever because you know how to transport kegs. You think this makes you a queen?" "I think it makes me useful," Linnet retorted, "which is more than I can say for you, standing here trying to intimidate someone half your size." Sorcha smiled. It was a cold, sharp expression. "I do not need to intimidate you, Linnet. Nature will do the work for me. You are soft. You bleed easily. You break easily." She took a step closer, looming over Linnet. "Emeric is amused by you now. You are a novelty, a toy. But when the war comes, and it always comes, he will need a wolf at his side, not a keg washer who counts onions." Sorcha reached out and ran a fingernail down Linnet's cheek. It was sharp enough to scratch. Linnet flinched, but didn't back away. "Enjoy his bed while you can," Sorcha whispered, "because when the novelty wears off, you will just be another bone in the pile." Sorcha turned and walked away, her silk dress hissing against the floor. Linnet stood there, shaking. She touched her cheek. There was a tiny bead of blood where Sorcha's nail had grazed her. "Is everything well?" Emeric was behind her. He had appeared silently, as always. He was looking at her, his eyes narrowing as he zeroed in on the tiny scratch on her cheek. "Who touched you?" His voice was low, a rumble of impending violence. "I scratched myself," Linnet lied quickly. She didn't know why she protected Sorcha. Maybe because she didn't want him to fight her battles. Maybe because she knew that if she told him, he would kill Sorcha, and then the whole court would rise up against him. Emeric stared at her, knowing she was lying. He reached out and brushed his thumb over the scratch, wiping the blood away. His touch was incredibly gentle. "You are a terrible liar," he murmured, "but I will let you keep your secrets, for now." Chapter 14. The Royal Bath. By evening, Linnet felt like she was covered in a layer of grime, physical and emotional. The castle was so dirty. Everything was soot, dust, and animal fur. "I need a bath," she announced when they returned to the royal chambers. "A real one, with hot water, and soap that doesn't smell like wet dog." Emeric, who was busy unbuckling his sword belt, paused. "There is a tub behind the screen. I will have water brought up." Half an hour later, a large wooden tub was filled with steaming water. Linnet waited for the servants to leave, then looked at Emeric. He was sitting in the chair by the fire, sharpening a dagger. "Turn around," she ordered. Emeric sighed, but he turned the chair so his back was to the screen. "I have seen naked women before, Linnet. It is not a revelation." "It's a revelation to me," she snapped, scurrying behind the screen. She stripped off the heavy velvet dress and sank into the water. It was glorious. She scrubbed her skin until it was pink, trying to wash away Sorcha's words. A toy, a novelty. "Emeric?" she called out softly. "I am here," he replied instantly. "I have not moved." "Why didn't you marry Sorcha?" The scraping of the whetstone stopped. The silence stretched for a long time. "Because Sorcha wants the crown," Emeric said finally. "She does not want the wolf. She wants the power, the title. If I were wounded, if I fell, she would step over my body to sit on the throne." Linnet splashed water on her face. "And what makes you think I'm any different? Maybe I'm playing the long game. Maybe I'm a mastermind." Emeric chuckled. "You sat on my throne because your feet hurt. You count onions, and you smell like peace. You do not want power, Linnet. That is why you are dangerous." "Dangerous?" Linnet laughed. "I'm about as dangerous as a marshmallow." "You are dangerous to me," Emeric said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Linnet froze in the tub. The water suddenly felt very hot. She didn't know what to say to that. "The water is getting cold," Emeric said, his tone returning to normal. "Get out before you shrivel." Chapter 15. The Nightmare. That night, the dream came. Linnet was back in the brewery, but the kegs were bleeding. The beer was red, and in the shadows, huge wolves with glowing eyes were circling her father, their teeth bared. She tried to run, but her feet were stuck in the mud. She screamed, but no sound came out. "Linnet!" She woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright. The room was dark, save for the dying embers of the fire. She was shaking violently, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Linnet!" Emeric was there. He wasn't asleep. He was sitting up, his hand hovering near her shoulder, unsure if he should touch her. "It was a dream," she gasped, pressing the heels of her hands to her eyes. "Just a dream. I'm sorry. Did I wake you?" "I was not asleep," Emeric said. "Your heart rate, it spiked. You smell of terror." He hesitated, then reached out and placed his large, warm hand on the back of her neck. He squeezed gently, a grounding pressure. "Breathe," he commanded. "Match my breathing." He took a slow, deep breath. Linnet tried to copy him. In and out. The warmth of his hand anchored her to the present. The smell of him, pine and rain, chased away the smell of blood from the dream. "Better?" he asked after a moment. "Yes," she whispered. She leaned into his touch, too exhausted to pull away. "Thank you." Emeric didn't remove his hand. He shifted, moving closer on the bed. "Tell me about the dream." "Wolves," she admitted. "They were hurting my family because of me." Emeric went still. His hand tightened slightly on her neck. "My pack will not touch your kin," he vowed, his voice fierce in the darkness. "I have sent sentries to your father's brewery, silent ones. He does not know they are there, but if anyone approaches with ill intent, they will not reach the door." Linnet turned to look at him. His face was shadowed, but his eyes were watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. You did that?" she asked. "When?" "The morning after the feast," Emeric said simply. "You are my mate. Your blood is my blood. Your kin is my kin." Linnet felt tears prick her eyes. It was too much. The fear, the exhaustion, and now this overwhelming, terrifying protection. "You really are a monster," she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You make it very hard to hate you." Emeric reached out and brushed the tear away with his thumb. His skin was rough, but his touch was reverent. "I am a monster, Linnet," he agreed softly. "But I am your monster. Go back to sleep. I will watch the dark." Linnet lay back down. This time, she didn't stay on the far edge. She shifted a few inches closer to the center, and when she fell asleep, her hand was resting just inches from his. Chapter 16. The Art of the Fang. "I don't see why I need a knife," Linnet complained, weighing the heavy steel dagger in her hand. "I have the candlestick back in the chamber. We have bonded. It has served me well enough." "A candlestick is for bludgeoning," Emeric corrected, his voice patient but firm. "A dagger is for ending the threat. If a wolf gets past me, which they will not, but if they do, you cannot bruise them. You must bleed them." They were in the royal armory, a cold, windowless room filled with the scent of oil and sharpened steel. It was early morning, and Emeric had insisted on this lesson before breakfast. He stood behind her, adjusting her grip on the hilt. "Do not hold it like a spoon," he murmured, his chest pressing against her back. "Hold it like a claw, an extension of your arm." Linnet tried to focus on the weapon, but it was difficult when the King of Valen was wrapping himself around her like a protective cloak. His heat seeped through her velvet dress. His breath stirred the hair by her ear. "It's heavy," she whispered, her heart doing that traitorous flutter again. "It is lighter than a corpse," Emeric said darkly. He guided her hand, slashing the air in a brutal, efficient arc. "Aim for the throat, the eyes, the soft spot under the ribs. Wolves are armored in fur and muscle, but we bleed just like you." "I don't want to make anyone bleed," Linnet said, lowering the blade. "I fix things. I brew beer. I organize supply lines. I am a constructive member of society, not a destructive one." Emeric took the dagger from her hand and sheathed it at her waist, tying the leather belt tight. He turned her around to face him. His amber eyes were serious, stripping away her sarcasm. "You are a queen in a court of apex predators," he said softly. "You have already made enemies. Sorcha watches you with hunger. Garrick tolerates you only because you are useful. You must have teeth, Linnet, even if they are made of steel." He reached out and brushed his thumb over the spot on her cheek where the scratch was fading. His eyes darkened. "You lied about the scratch," he stated. "It wasn't a question." Linnet stiffened. "I tripped into a sharp tapestry." Emeric didn't smile. "A tapestry with claws. I know it was Sorcha. I smelled her on you. The only reason she is still breathing is because you did not ask for her head." "If you kill her, you start a civil war," Linnet argued, poking him in the chest. "Her family controls the iron mines. I read the ledgers. You can't just eat your political opponents, Emeric." Emeric caught her finger, holding it gently. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You read the ledgers?" "I was bored," she shrugged, "and your bookkeeping is atrocious." "Keep the dagger," Emeric commanded, releasing her hand. "And never leave the sanctuary walls without me, Linnet. If you vanish, the wolf takes over completely. I become blind to traps, deaf to reason. I would slaughter a village just to find your scent. Do you understand?" "I understand," she whispered, a chill running down her spine. "Stay close to me today. The river sleds launch at noon. If your plan works, the pack eats. If it fails..." "If it fails," Linnet finished, "I suppose I'll be the one on the menu." Chapter 17. Ice and Iron. The banks of the Black River were crowded with soldiers, workers, and skeptical lords. The air was crisp, biting at Linnet's nose, but the sun was shining brightly on the frozen white expanse of the water. "It will not hold," Lord Vorn grumbled, stomping his boot on the frozen mud. "The ice is treacherous. The weight of the meat will crack it." "The weight is distributed," Linnet said, her voice projecting louder than she felt. She stood next to Emeric, wrapped in her gray furs. "That's the point of the sleds. It's physics. Or, well, common sense." On the ice, a team of 20 wolves, shifted into their massive, four-legged forms, were harnessed to the large wooden sleds Linnet had designed. The sleds were piled high with crates of salted venison and grain. "Ready!" Garrick barked from the lead sled. He looked ridiculous in the harness, a massive gray wolf with an expression of grim determination. "Mush!" Linnet yelled. Emeric looked down at her. "We do not say mush. We say run." "Mush is more whimsical," Linnet muttered. "Run!" Emeric roared, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. The wolves surged forward. The ropes went taut. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of wood on ice, the sleds began to move. They didn't sink. They didn't crack the ice. They glided. Within seconds, they were picking up speed, skimming over the frozen river like leaves on the wind. A cheer went up from the soldiers on the bank. It was a rough, guttural sound, but it was undeniable. "They move fast," Vorn admitted, his one eye wide. "They will reach the outpost by nightfall." Emeric turned to Linnet. Pride radiated off him like heat. He placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. "You have fed my army, little bird. You have done what a council of warriors could not." Linnet beamed. For the first time since arriving at Ironwrath, she didn't feel like an imposter. She felt capable. "It was nothing," she said, blushing. "Just basic logistics." "It was everything," Emeric corrected. Suddenly, a commotion broke out near the rear sleds, the ones still being loaded on the bank. A rope snapped with the sound of a pistol crack. A stack of heavy crates, unsecured, began to slide. Directly toward Linnet. "Linnet!" She heard the shout, saw the shadow of the falling crates, but her boots slipped on the icy mud. She couldn't move. A blur of black fur hit her. Emeric slammed into her, tackling her sideways into a snowbank just as the crates crashed down, shattering on the spot where she had been standing seconds ago. Splinters of wood and salted meat exploded outward. Linnet lay in the snow, gasping for air, crushed beneath the weight of the king. Emeric was covering her completely, shielding her body with his. He lifted his head. His eyes were no longer human. They were fully wolf, wild, golden, and dilated with rage. He snarled, snapping his head toward the broken crates. There, standing near the frayed rope, stood a servant, and watching from the shadows of the tree line, her face a mask of cold satisfaction, was Lady Sorcha. Chapter 18. The Red Snow. Emeric didn't speak. He roared. It was a sound that made the ground shake. He scrambled off Linnet, pulling her to her feet with one hand while drawing his sword with the other. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, scanning her frantically. "Did it touch you?" "I'm fine," Linnet gasped, shaking snow from her furs. "Emeric, I'm fine!" But Emeric wasn't listening. The separation sickness, combined with the adrenaline of nearly seeing his mate crushed, had snapped his control. He turned toward the loading dock. The soldiers parted like the Red Sea, terrified of the look on their king's face. He marched toward the servant who had been handling the rope. The man dropped to his knees, sobbing. "It snapped, sire. I swear by the moon, it just snapped!" Emeric grabbed the rope. He inspected the frayed end. "Cut," he growled. "This was cut." He looked up. Sorcha was gone. She had vanished into the crowd the moment the crates fell. Emeric threw the rope down. He grabbed the servant by the tunic and lifted him effortlessly into the air. "Who paid you? Tell me, and I will make your death quick." "Emeric, stop!" Linnet ran forward, grabbing his arm. It was like grabbing a steel bar. "Put him down, he's just a pawn." "He tried to kill you," Emeric snarled, not looking at her. His attention was entirely on the terrified man. "The punishment is death." "If you kill him, we learn nothing," Linnet shouted, stepping between them. She placed her hands on Emeric's chest, right over the wolf pelt vest. "Look at me! Look at me!" Emeric froze. He looked down. The red haze in his eyes began to recede, replaced by the confusion of the bond. "You are cold," he noted, his voice rough. "You are shivering." "I'm standing in snow," Linnet said, keeping her voice steady despite the trembling in her legs. "Put him down, Emeric. Lock him up. Question him. But don't be the butcher they expect you to be. Be the king." Emeric stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. The wolf wanted blood. The man wanted to please her. With a growl of frustration, he dropped the servant. "Take him to the dungeons," he barked at the guards. "If he speaks, bring the words to me." He turned back to Linnet. He scooped her up into his arms, ignoring her protest. "We are going back," he stated. "You are freezing, and I need to be away from here." He buried his face in the fur of her hood, inhaling deeply. He was shaking. Linnet realized then that he wasn't just angry, he was terrified. The thought of losing her had unhinged him. "Okay," she whispered, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Take me home." Chapter 19. The Hearth and the Heart. The royal chambers were a sanctuary against the chaos of the day. The fire roared in the hearth, casting a warm, orange glow over the stone walls. Emeric hadn't let Linnet go since they entered the room. He sat on the edge of the bed, pulling her between his knees, his hands running up and down her arms, checking for broken bones that he knew weren't there. "I am intact," Linnet promised, placing her hands on his face to stop his frantic searching. "See? 10 fingers, 2 eyes, 1 very cold nose." Emeric closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against hers. "I saw the crates fall. For a heartbeat, I thought—" His voice cracked. He didn't finish the sentence. "You saved me," Linnet said softly. "You are always saving me." "I am failing you," Emeric whispered. "I brought you into a nest of vipers. I thought my protection was enough. It is not." He pulled back, looking at her with a raw intensity that took her breath away. "Sorcha cut the rope. I know it." "I know it too," Linnet admitted. "Why did you stop me?" Emeric asked. "I could have hunted her down. I could have ended it." "Because you are a king, not an executioner," Linnet said firmly. And because I don't want you to have more blood on your hands for my sake. You have enough ghosts, Emeric. Emeric looked at her as if she were a riddle he couldn't solve. You are strange, Linnet. You should hate us. You should hate me. I tried, she confessed, a small smile playing on her lips. I really did. I made a list of reasons to hate you. Kidnapper, eats raw meat, terrible decorator, but... But? Emeric prompted, his thumb tracing her lower lip. But you kept the fire lit because I was cold, she whispered. You ate the onions. You protected my father. You are a good man, Emeric. Buried under a lot of fur and grumpiness, but a good man. Emeric made a low sound in his throat. He leaned in, closing the distance between them. It wasn't the aggressive, claiming kiss she had feared in the beginning. It was slow, hesitant, a question. Linnet answered it. She tilted her head up, meeting him halfway. His lips were warm and chapped. He tasted of winter air and desperation. The kiss deepened, his hands sliding into her hair, holding her like she was the only solid thing in the world. It wasn't the kiss of a captor, it was the kiss of a drowning man finding air. When they broke apart, breathless, Emeric rested his forehead against hers again. I will not let them take you, he vowed into the silence. I will burn this kingdom to ash before I let them touch you. Let's try to avoid the burning part, Linnet murmured, her fingers tangled in his hair. I just got the supply lines working. Chapter 20. The Message. The peace lasted for 2 days. Linnet and Emeric existed in a bubble of domesticity that baffled the court. They ate together, cooked meat only, they strategized over maps, and they slept, still clothed, but tangled together in the center of the bed. Then the letter came. It arrived not by Raven, but by a frantic messenger from the village. A human boy who looked terrified to be inside the wolf's den. For the queen, the boy stammered, thrusting a crumpled parchment at Linnet before bolting for the exit. Linnet was in the gardens, inspecting the winter herbs. Emeric was a few paces away, speaking with Garrick about the dungeon prisoner, who had conveniently died before speaking. Another accident, surely. Linnet unfolded the paper. Her blood ran cold. It was her father's handwriting. Shaky, hurried, but his. Linnet. The soldiers. The king's sentries. They are gone. Men in gray cloaks came. They said the king ordered them to take me to the old mill. They say I am accused of treason. Please, daughter, come alone. They say if you tell the wolf, my throat will be cut before he reaches the door. No, Linnet whispered. She looked at Emeric. He had sworn to protect her father. He had sent sentries, but the note said the sentries were gone. Men in gray cloaks. That was Garrick's color. Or Sorcha's mercenaries. If she showed this to Emeric, he would rampage. He would tear the castle apart. But if the note was true, her father was being held at the old mill, just outside the castle walls, but technically outside the sanctuary of the keep. If Emeric left the castle now, with the blood moon rising tomorrow, the separation sickness would blind him. He would be vulnerable, and if he went feral outside the walls, his enemies would kill him and claim he had gone mad. It was a trap for him. Linnet? Emeric called, turning toward her. What is that? Linnet crushed the paper in her fist. She forced a smile, though her face felt like a mask of clay. Nothing, she called back. Just a list of herbs I need from the pantry. I'll be right back. Do not wander, Emeric reminded her. I must finish reviewing the prisoner logs with Garrick. I will be in the war room. I won't be long, she lied. She waited until the heavy door clicked shut behind him. Then she turned and ran. Not toward the pantry, but toward the postern gate. She had her dagger. She knew the way to the old mill. It was only a mile. She could run there, free her father, and be back before Emeric realized she was gone. She had to. She couldn't let him walk into the trap. She slipped through the small wooden door in the garden wall, leaving the safety of the castle behind. The wind howled, carrying the scent of snow and approaching danger. Inside the war room, Emeric stopped mid-sentence. He clutched his chest, his eyes flashing wide. A low, agonizing growl ripped from his throat. "She is gone," he gasped, the pupil of his eye blowing wide, swallowing the iris. "She has left the sanctuary." Chapter 21. The Breaking of the Chain. The war room exploded. It wasn't a bomb. It was the king. One moment, Emeric had been standing by the map table, clutching his chest as if an arrow had pierced his heart. The next, the heavy oak table was flipped over with a deafening crash, scattering lead markers and parchment across the room like confetti. "Sire!" Garrick shouted, backing away, his hand flying to his sword. "Control yourself! The blood moon is not until tomorrow." Emeric didn't hear him. The world had narrowed to a single, agonizing thread. The bond, the invisible golden chain that connected his soul to Linnet's, was vibrating with a frequency that shattered his rationality. She was gone. She had left the sanctuary. She was out there, in the cold, in the dark, away from him. Emeric gasped, falling to his knees. His voice was no longer human. It was a distorted, grinding rasp. "She left." His bones cracked. The sound was wet and sickening. His shoulders broadened, ripping the seams of his silk tunic. His hands clawed at the stone floor, fingernails lengthening into black, obsidian talons. "Lock the doors!" Garrick roared to the guards. "Do not let him leave! If he goes into the city like this, he will slaughter everyone in his path." The guards slammed the iron-bound doors shut and dropped the heavy crossbar. Emeric lifted his head. His eyes were gone, replaced by two pools of molten gold, devoid of pupil or iris. He looked at the sealed door. He didn't see wood and iron. He saw an obstacle between him and his heart. "Linnet," he growled. He launched himself. It was a blur of violence. Emeric hit the doors with the force of a siege engine. The wood splintered. The iron hinges screamed and sheared off the stone. The heavy doors flew outward, knocking two guards into the opposite wall. Garrick stood in the wreckage, his sword drawn but shaking. "Emeric, listen to me! It is a trap! They want you to run!" Emeric turned back for a fraction of a second. He was halfway between man and wolf, a monstrous hybrid of fur and flesh, teeth bared in a snarl that promised infinite death. "Then I will run," the beast said. He turned and sprinted down the corridor, moving on all fours, faster than any horse. He didn't take the stairs. He leaped from the landing, landing in the courtyard with a crater-cracking thud, and then he was gone, a shadow tearing through the snow, hunting the scent of vanilla and peace. Chapter 22. The Old Mill. The wind bit at Linnet's face, stinging her eyes, but she kept running. The snow was deep here, midway to the calves of her boots, making every step a struggle. "Just a mile," she panted, clutching the hilt of the dagger beneath her cloak. "Just a mile." The old mill loomed ahead, a rotting skeleton of timber and stone sitting on the edge of the frozen stream. The water wheel was encased in ice, silent and still. It looked abandoned. It looked like a grave. Linnet slowed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She scanned the perimeter. There were tracks in the snow, fresh ones. She crept toward the main door, which hung loosely on one hinge. She pushed it open with the toe of her boot, holding her breath. Inside, the mill was shadowy and smelled of damp rot. In the center of the room, illuminated by a single lantern, a man sat tied to a chair. "Father!" Linnet cried, rushing forward. The man looked up. It was her father, Thomas the brewer. He was bruised, a gag tied around his mouth, his eyes wide with terror. He was shaking his head frantically. Linnet dropped to her knees, her frozen fingers fumbling with the knots at his wrists. "I've got you," she whispered. "I'm going to get you out. We have to go, now." "Such a dutiful daughter," a voice purred from the darkness above. Linnet froze. She looked up toward the loft. Lady Sorcha stood there, leaning casually against the railing. She was flanked by 4 men in gray cloaks, mercenaries, heavily armed. "I told them you would come," Sorcha called down, descending the rotting stairs. "Garrick thought you were too cowardly, but I knew. I knew you were stupid enough to try to be a hero." Linnet stood up, putting herself between Sorcha and her father. She drew the dagger. Her hand was trembling, but she held it the way Emeric had taught her, like a claw. "Let him go, Sorcha," Linnet said, her voice echoing in the hollow space. "This is between you and me." "Oh no," Sorcha laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "This is between me and the king. You are just the meat I used to drag the wolf out of his den." She gestured to the mercenaries. "The king will be here soon. The sickness will drive him mad. He will be feral, blind, easy to kill." "He will kill you all," Linnet warned, stepping back as the men circled her. "Perhaps," Sorcha smiled, drawing a long, curved blade. "But you won't be alive to see it." Chapter 23. The Monster Unbound. "Grab her," Sorcha commanded. "But don't kill her yet. I want Emeric to smell her blood when he arrives. It will make him reckless." Two of the mercenaries lunged. Linnet didn't freeze. She remembered the lesson. Aim for the soft spots. She dropped low, dodging the first man's clumsy grab, and slashed upward. The dagger bit into the man's thigh. He howled, stumbling back. The second man grabbed her hood, yanking her backward. Linnet gasped as the collar choked her, but she kicked out, driving her heel into his kneecap. "She fights!" the man shouted, backhanding her across the face. Linnet hit the floor hard, tasting copper. Her vision swam. Her father was thrashing in his chair, making muffled screams of rage. Sorcha laughed. "Pathetic. Hold her down." The men pinned Linnet to the rotting floorboards. One knelt on her arm, forcing the dagger from her grip. Sorcha walked over, positioning the tip of her sword over Linnet's heart. "Any last words, brewer?" Sorcha sneered. "Yes," Linnet wheezed, spitting blood onto Sorcha's boot. "Run!" Sorcha frowned. "What?" Then the world ended. A sound ripped through the night. A howl so loud, so filled with ancient primordial rage, that the lantern glass shattered. The wooden walls of the mill shook. The door didn't just open, it disintegrated. A black blur smashed into the room. It wasn't a man. It wasn't a wolf. It was a hurricane of claws and teeth. The mercenary holding Linnet's arm didn't even have time to scream. The beast seized him by the head and threw him, actually threw him, into the stone grinding wheel 20 feet away. The sickening crack of bone was audible over the wind. "Kill it!" Sorcha screamed, backing away. "Kill the beast!" The remaining 3 mercenaries drew their swords and charged. They might as well have attacked a landslide with toothpicks. Emeric moved with a speed that defied physics. He ducked under a swinging blade, ripped the throat out of the second man, and broke the third man's spine with a single swipe of his arm. It was brutal. It was efficient. It was a massacre. Linnet scrambled backward, pushing herself against her father's chair. She had wanted him to come. She had prayed for him, but looking at the creature standing amidst the carnage, chest heaving, covered in gore, she felt a spike of pure terror. He was huge. His clothes were shredded ribbons hanging off his frame. His skin was gray-black, stretched over unnatural muscles. And his eyes. He turned slowly. He looked at Sorcha. Then he looked at Linnet. There was no recognition in those golden eyes, only hunger and rage. Chapter 24. The Silver Wolf. Sorcha realized, perhaps for the first time, that she had miscalculated. "Emeric," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She held her sword up. "Emeric, look at me! I am highborn! I am—" The beast roared, a spray of saliva and blood hitting the floor. He took a step toward her. Sorcha dropped her sword. She knew she couldn't fight him as a human. Her body contorted, bones snapping and reshaping, fur bursting from her skin. In seconds, a large, sleek silver wolf stood where the woman had been. She snarled and lunged, not at Emeric, but at Linnet. It was a desperate gambit. If she killed the mate, the alpha would break. He would be paralyzed by grief long enough for her to escape. "No!" Linnet screamed. She couldn't reach her dagger. It was 10 feet away. The silver wolf was airborne, jaws gaping for her throat. Emeric intercepted her. He didn't shift fully. He didn't need to. He caught the silver wolf in midair with his bare hands, grabbing her by the scruff and the throat. He slammed her into the ground with enough force to crack the floorboards. The silver wolf yelped, scrabbling with her claws, tearing at Emeric's arms. He didn't flinch. He squeezed. Sorcha shifted back, forced out of her wolf form by the crushing pressure on her windpipe. She lay gasping on the wood, human again, naked and broken. Emeric raised a clawed hand to finish her. "Emeric!" Linnet shouted. The beast froze. His hand hovered inches from Sorcha's throat. He turned his head toward Linnet. He breathed heavily, a rasping, rattling sound. He took a step toward her, leaving Sorcha gasping on the floor. He loomed over Linnet and her father. He was covered in blood, some his, mostly others. He smelled of death. He reached out a hand toward Linnet. The claws were sharp enough to gut her. Linnet didn't flinch. She didn't run. She stood up, her legs shaking, and stepped toward him. "Emeric," she whispered. "It's me. It's Linnet." The beast tilted his head. He growled low in his throat, a warning. "Don't touch." "I know you," she said, her voice trembling. "You like red. You hate onions. You think mush is a silly word." She reached out and placed her hand on his chest, right over his pounding heart. "You are my monster," she whispered. "Come back." Chapter 25. The Walk Home. The touch burned. For Emeric, trapped in the red haze of the feral state, the hand on his chest was a brand. It was grounding. It was cool. And it smelled. It no longer just smelled of peace, but of home. The gold in his eyes began to swirl, retreating. The black talons retracted, shrinking back into human fingernails. The monstrous bulk of his shoulders diminished, leaving him merely a very large, very exhausted man. He blinked. The red haze cleared. He looked down. Linnet was standing there, her cheek bruised, her lip split, her hand on his chest. "Linnet?" he rasped. His voice sounded like he had swallowed broken glass. "I'm here," she sobbed, collapsing against him. Emeric caught her. He fell to his knees, pulling her into his lap, burying his face in her neck. He shook violently. I felt you vanish. I thought you were dead." "I'm okay," she promised, stroking his hair, ignoring the blood matting it. "I'm okay." Emeric looked up. He saw Thomas, tied to the chair, staring at them with eyes the size of dinner plates. "Your father," Emeric grunted. He stood up, lifting Linnet with him, and set her gently on her feet. He walked to the chair and snapped the ropes binding Thomas as if they were threads. Thomas fell forward, coughing. "Your Majesty, thank you." Emeric ignored him. He turned to where Sorcha lay huddled on the floor. She was conscious, clutching her bruised throat, staring at him with terror. Emeric walked over to her. He raised a clawed hand, ready to tear out her throat. "Emeric, no," Linnet said, her voice soft but firm. She touched his arm. "Enough blood. Let her live with the shame. It is a heavier burden." Emeric paused. He looked at Linnet, then down at the shivering woman. "You are exiled," he said, his voice deadly calm. "If the sun rises and you are within the borders of Valen, I will hunt you. And next time, I will not stop." Sorcha didn't argue. She scrambled to her feet, naked and shivering. With a final, hateful glance, she threw herself forward, bones cracking as she shifted violently back into the silver wolf, fleeing into the snowy night on 4 legs. Emeric turned back to Linnet. He swayed slightly. The adrenaline was fading, and the toll of the partial shift was hitting him. "We must go back," he murmured. "The sanctuary." "I can't walk," Linnet admitted. Her adrenaline was gone too, and her ankle was throbbing where she had kicked the mercenary. Emeric didn't hesitate. He picked her up. Then he looked at Thomas. "Can you walk, brewer?" "Yes, sire," Thomas stammered. "Good. Carry the lantern." They walked back in silence. The storm had broken, leaving the moon to shine on the bloody snow. Emeric carried Linnet the entire mile, slowing his pace only to allow the stumbling brewer to catch his breath. When they finally reached the castle gates, the guards rushed out to meet them. Garrick was at the front, looking frantic. "Sire!" Garrick shouted. "We thought—" "Clear the way," Emeric rasped. He carried Linnet straight through the courtyard, up the winding stairs, and into the royal chambers. He kicked the door shut and locked it. He walked to the bed and collapsed, pulling Linnet down with him. He didn't let go. He wrapped his arms and legs around her, caging her against him, burying his face in her hair. "Safe," he mumbled into the pillow. "Safe." Within seconds, the Wolf King was asleep. Linnet lay there, staring at the firelight dancing on the ceiling. She was bruised, bloody, and exhausted. But as she listened to the steady beat of Emeric's heart, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't just a guest anymore. She was the queen. And she was never leaving this room again. Chapter 26. The Blood and the Water. The sun was high when Linnet finally woke. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting a dull red light across the room. She tried to move, but her limbs felt like they were made of lead. Her ankle throbbed a dull, rhythmic beat. She shifted, realizing she was pinned. Emeric was still asleep, his heavy arm thrown over her waist, his face buried in the crook of her neck. He was dead weight, the exhaustion of the transformation having drained him completely. "Emeric," she whispered, her voice rasping. He didn't wake slowly. He woke instantly, his body tensing, a low growl vibrating in his chest before his conscious mind caught up. He lifted his head, his eyes wild for a fraction of a second before they found hers. "Linnet." He breathed her name like a prayer. He pulled back, his gaze raking over her face, flinching when he saw the bruise on her cheek and the split lip. "I did this. I failed to stop them." "You didn't do this," Linnet corrected, reaching up to touch his face. "Mercenaries did this. You did the other part, the part where they stopped breathing." Emeric looked down at himself. His chest was covered in dried blood, dark, flaky, and grim. His breeches were shredded. He looked like a nightmare brought to life. "I must wash," he said, disgust heavy in his voice. "I smell of slaughter. I cannot be near you like this." He tried to pull away, to roll out of bed, but Linnet tightened her grip on his arm. "We both need to wash," she said, "and I don't think I can walk to the tub on my own." Emeric paused. He looked at her swollen ankle. Without a word, he scooped her up. He carried her to the bath area behind the screen. The water in the tub was cold from the night before, but Emeric placed a hand on the copper side. Linnet watched, fascinated, as heat radiated from his palm, steam beginning to rise from the water within moments. "A useful trick," she murmured. "Wolf heat," he grunted. He stripped the ruined clothes from his body and helped her out of her tattered dress. There was no shame now, no awkwardness. They had seen death together. Nudity felt trivial in comparison. They sank into the warm water. The water turned pink almost immediately as the blood washed away. Emeric didn't relax. He took a cloth and began to scrub his skin violently, as if trying to erase the memory of the beast. "Hey," Linnet said softly, catching his hand. "Stop. You're going to take the skin off." "It is not coming off," Emeric whispered, staring at his hands. "The blood. It feels permanent. I lost control, Linnet. I broke the sanctuary. I became— it." "You came back," she reminded him, taking the cloth and gently washing the soot from his shoulder. "You heard me. You chose me over the rage. That's not a monster, Emeric. That's a man." Emeric closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against her shoulder. "I was terrified. When I felt you leave, it was as if the sun had gone out." "I won't leave again," Linnet promised, kissing the wet hair at his temple. "Next time I go for a walk, I'll leave a note. A real one." Chapter 27. The Knee. The great hall was silent when they entered the next morning. News of the massacre at the old mill had spread. Everyone knew. They knew the king had gone feral. They knew he had ripped men apart with his bare hands, and they knew who had brought him back. Linnet walked beside Emeric. She limped slightly, leaning on a cane of polished ebony that Emeric had found for her. She wore a fresh gown of deep forest green, her hair braided high to hide the unwashed soot she couldn't quite get out. Emeric walked stiffly. He was dressed in formal blacks, his face a mask of stone. He expected judgment. He expected fear. They reached the dais. Emeric did not sit. He stood before the throne of bones, facing his pack. "Sorcha is gone," Emeric announced, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "She is exiled. Her lands are forfeit." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Linnet stepped forward, drawing the crumpled, blood-stained parchment from her sleeve, the forged note that had lured her to the mill. She held it high for the lords to see. "She used a daughter's love as a blade against your king," Linnet said firmly. "The evidence of her treason is written in her own hireling's blood." The murmurs turned into a dark, collective growl of agreement. "And," Emeric continued, his hand finding Linnet's and holding it tight, "the queen remains." Garrick stepped forward. The beta looked tired. He had been up all night securing the castle. He looked at Emeric, then he looked at Linnet. He looked at the cane, the bruise on her cheek, and the way she stood, not behind the king, but beside him. Garrick drew his sword. Emeric tensed, ready to fight. But Garrick didn't attack. He reversed the blade, holding the hilt out, and dropped to one knee. Not to Emeric, to Linnet. "My queen," Garrick said, his voice gruff but respectful. "You walked into the dark. You brought the alpha back. You have the heart of a wolf." Linnet blinked, squeezed Emeric's hand, and cleared her throat. "Thank you, Garrick, though I prefer to think I have the heart of a very stubborn brewer." One by one, the other lords dropped to their knees. Swords hit the floor. Heads bowed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was awe. They weren't bowing to the king's wife. They were bowing to the woman who could leash the storm. Emeric looked at her, a slow, proud smile breaking his stoic mask. "It seems," he whispered, "that you have conquered the pack, little bird." "I didn't mean to," Linnet whispered back. "I just wanted them to stop staring at me." "Too late," Emeric murmured. "They will stare at you forever now, and so will I." Chapter 28. The Paperwork of the Soul. Later that evening, after the endless meetings and the reassigning of Sorcha's iron mines, Linnet and Emeric retreated to the royal chambers. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm. Linnet sat on the window seat, watching the snow fall over the mountains. Her father, Thomas, was safe in the guest quarters, recovering from his ordeal. Everything was settled. Emeric stood by the fire, watching her. "So," Linnet said, turning to face him, "is this the part where we discuss the annulment?" Emeric flinched. "The what?" "The annulment," Linnet said, keeping her face serious, though her eyes danced. "I mean, technically, this marriage was a clerical error. I sat on a chair. You said a sentence. It's hardly binding in a court of law. I'm sure there's a loophole." Emeric crossed the room in 3 long strides. He placed his hands on either side of her on the window seat, trapping her. "There is no loophole," he growled, though there was no heat in it, only desperation. "There is no annulment. You are mine, Linnet, by the law of the bone, by the law of the blood, by the law of—" He struggled for a word. "Common sense?" Linnet suggested. "Love," Emeric corrected, his voice dropping to a whisper. Linnet stopped breathing for a moment. She looked at him, this terrifying, beautiful, damaged man who would burn the world for her. "You love me?" she asked softly. "Even though I complain about the draft? And I made you eat onions?" "I love you because you made me eat onions," Emeric said, resting his forehead against hers. "I have spent my life surrounded by people who fear me or want to use me. You, You just want me to be warm. You want me to be a man." He kissed her then. It wasn't desperate like the kiss in the mill. It was slow. It was a promise. It was a seal on a document that no scribe could ever write. "I love you too," Linnet whispered against his lips, "even if you are a terrible decorator." Emeric laughed, the sound rumbling in his chest. "I will hire a decorator. I will buy you cushions. I will fill this castle with soft things, if it makes you stay." "I'm staying," Linnet promised. "The castle is cold, Emeric, but you're the warmest thing I've ever known." Chapter 29. The Father's Blessing. The next morning, Thomas the brewer stood by the castle gates. A wagon was waiting to take him back to the village, escorted this time by 10 of Emeric's elite guards. Linnet hugged him tight, burying her face in his familiar, flour-dusted coat. "I'm sorry, Papa," she murmured. "I dragged you into this." "You didn't drag me, Linnet," Thomas said, pulling back and holding her by the shoulders. He looked older, tired, but his eyes were bright. "You grew up. I always knew you were too big for the brewery. You have a fire in you." He looked over her shoulder to where Emeric stood. The king was waiting a respectful distance away, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the perimeter like a hawk. "He is a good man," Thomas said quietly. "A scary man, a very large man, but he looks at you the way I used to look at your mother." Linnet smiled through her tears. "He does." "Just," Thomas lowered his voice, "tell him to go easy on the taxes for the brewery next year? Friends and family discount?" Linnet laughed, wiping her eyes. "I'll see what I can do, Papa. I have some pull with the management." She watched him climb into the wagon. As it rolled away, she felt a pang of sadness, but it was fleeting. This was her life now. She wasn't just the brewer's daughter anymore. Emeric stepped up beside her, wrapping his cloak around her shoulders against the biting wind. "He is safe?" Emeric asked. "He is safe," Linnet nodded. "He asked for a tax break." Emeric snorted. "He shall have it. He raised a queen. I owe him a debt I can never repay." They turned back toward the castle. The dark stone walls didn't look ominous anymore. They looked like home. "Come," Emeric said. "The council is waiting. They want to discuss the spring trade routes. Garrick thinks we should invade the south. I told him to ask you first." Linnet grinned, leaning into his side. "Invade the south? No, too humid. But I bet they have excellent spices. We should negotiate a trade deal. Cinnamon for iron." Emeric looked down at her with pure adoration. "Cinnamon for iron. It shall be done." Chapter 30. The Cushion. 3 months later. The throne room was bustling. The spring equinox was approaching, and the lords were gathering for the petitioning. Emeric sat on the throne of bones. He looked regal, imposing, and bored out of his mind. He listened as a minor lord droned on about property lines and sheep grazing rights. The heavy doors opened. Linnet walked in. She wasn't wearing the oversized velvet dress anymore. She wore a gown of fitted black silk, embroidered with silver vines. A crown of delicate silver leaves rested on her head. She didn't limp. She glided. The court bowed low. Linnet walked up the dais. She didn't stop at the side chair. She walked right up to the throne of bones. Emeric sat up straighter, his eyes lighting up. "My queen, to what do I owe this interruption?" "I have a petition," Linnet announced, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "And what does the queen desire?" Emeric asked, a playful smirk tugging at his lips. "More onions? A new dagger? The heads of your enemies?" "Comfort," Linnet declared. She produced a small, velvet object from behind her back. It was a cushion, a bright, emerald-green cushion stuffed with the finest down. She stepped forward and, while the entire court watched in stunned silence, she shoved the cushion behind Emeric's back, right against the jagged spine of the chair. "There," she said, dusting off her hands. "Now it's a throne. Before, it was a torture device." The court held its breath. You did not modify the ancestral seat. You did not bring throw pillows into the hall of war. Emeric leaned back. He tested the cushion. He sank into it. He looked at his lords. He looked at Linnet, who was standing there with her hands on her hips, daring him to object. "It is," Emeric rumbled, his voice serious. He reached out, grabbed Linnet by the waist, and pulled her onto his lap. She squeaked, landing sideways across his thighs. "Perfect," Emeric finished, nuzzling her neck in front of everyone. "Comfy, my queen?" Linnet laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck, looking out at the shocked, terrifying, wonderful court of wolves. "Yes," she whispered. "Finally." The end.